Well, hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be able to share this time with you again, whatever time that may be for you. Bill mentioned a few weeks ago how much he enjoys Sundays and our meetings together and the time we share. And I have to say, I echo that as well. I look forward to these Sundays. I don't think a Sunday goes by when I've connected where I haven't learned something from Bill or Derek or Ed that has been helpful to me. And today, Bill's wonderful talk was certainly no exception. So today, my presentation is entitled Observations. And of course, that is day 10 of the Tao of Joy Every Day. And the subtitle I've chosen for this presentation is Detached and Unbiased Examination. So I want to start the presentation by talking about observation in the context of the scientific method. I'm a big fan of science, although I'm not a scientist or I haven't been formally trained in science. I appreciate it as part of human culture. And what I've noticed, and I'll share this with you, is that to me, the Tao teachings, a lot of them are embodied in the scientific process. And I'm going to try to illustrate that today in my talk on observations because, of course, observation is a key component of the scientific process. So the scientific method, I'm sure many of you know it. Hey, some of you listening to this talk may be scientists and certainly know it better than I do as a layperson. But I'm just briefly going to say, in the scientific method, you take a guess about how nature operates. You might start that by asking a question and doing some background research, but you take a guess, and that guess, of course, is the hypothesis that you construct. That's what a hypothesis is. It's a guess, really, about the way nature operates. And then you calculate consequences, like if your guess is true, what should happen? And in thinking and calculating those consequences, you think up an experiment to test it. And after you test it, you analyze the results and you try to draw conclusions. And if it appears that your hypothesis was true, then you go ahead and report that. And of course, it's important to note that just because it's true, it doesn't mean it's going to be true for all time. It may only be true for the consequences you thought of and were able to calculate. There may have been other consequences that you were unaware of, or even if you were aware of, that you weren't able to calculate in order to test. You think of Newtonian physics. It works great still to this day, but it wasn't perfect. And even though it held for hundreds of years, when Einstein came along and there had been observations that the orbit of Mercury was falling off by an arcsecond a century, there was a problem, and Einstein tackled that problem. And now we understand gravity in a deeper way, but we still don't fully understand it. Then, of course, the other part, the way the scientific method can turn out, is the hypothesis ends up being false or only partially true. And again, here's another example of how the scientific method mirrors the Tao teachings. Integrity. You still report the results. And this leads into another Tao teaching, the teaching on failure. In science, many times, the failures in the process are what eventually lead to the success, as long as you complete the loop of the scientific method by trying again and either modifying your hypothesis or constructing a new one. Now you might say, well, what does all this have to do with observation? Well, obviously, like I said, in science, observation is a key part of figuring out what's going on in nature. But the reason why I actually brought it up was to point out how hard it is, even for scientists who are formally trained to eliminate their biases in order to really see the true nature of reality and understand it, or the true nature of nature itself. But it's hard because scientists, just like you and me, they're human too, and they're subject to bias. And a lot of times, bias is unconscious. We're not even aware of it, which is why the teachings of the Tao about turning inward and examining yourself are so important, so that you can understand yourself, maybe become aware of those subconscious biases, or at least a little more aware, allowing you to put them aside, hopefully. So that's why I wanted to bring up the scientific method, because obviously the kind of observations that we do in the Tao, Derek talks about, the ancients observed. They observed nature. They observed human interactions, and they developed and recognized patterns that helped them. And so I want to start by talking about observing patterns in nature. And to do that, I've depicted a scene here of a Native American hunting the buffalo. And to point out that even a primitive hunter-gathering societies, which is how man started out, they had to observe the herds and what they did and where they went during different times of the year. And of course, they followed them because their way of life depended often on hunting and following a particular kind of herd. In the scene here, it's the Native American and the buffalo. And the thing I always admire about hunter-gatherer societies is how they never wasted anything. Every part of the buffalo was used. And also, too, they didn't destroy it. Yes, man can kill a buffalo and use what it has to offer to help him. But they were dependent on the buffalo, so they would never have wiped it out to the point of extinction. It wasn't, frankly, until the Europeans came onto the continent and started shooting them, from trains when the population became near extinct, and thus destroying the very harmonious natural way that the Native Americans lived with the buffalo. But it was in observing patterns that the natives knew, what to do in terms of hunting and gathering. And then, of course, when civilization became more stable with agriculture, the patterns of nature were still important. People realized the cycles of the seasons. They knew that, hey, there's a time for planting. There's an optimal time for reaping. There's a time to let the ground rest and to let it be dormant. And of course, the wisdom gained from those observations were done through, unbiased and careful observation. But they didn't just observe nature. They also realized that you could observe human interactions. What creates the happy, harmonious human interaction we see in this picture? What are the patterns that lead to that kind of harmony? Can we understand them, master them, put them to use? And also, too, also observe when human interactions don't go so well, to understand, well, why is it that they don't go well? What can you observe to help you understand, and then put that wisdom about what's going wrong to use to learn what to avoid. So observation is very critical. Now, the other point that I wanted to make about observation is the benefit of detached observation. And the reason why I put a computer screen up here is because one of the things I do, I wear a lot of hats in my career, but one of them is I do some programming. And I'm very fortunate to work with a friend. He's not usually on site, but I can call him. He works on projects off-site. I work on things on-site. We work on different projects. And we collaborate. We've become friends, and we have a lot in common. And I know when I get stuck in a programming thing, it's always nice to have him because he's, frankly, far more skilled than I am. So I can contact him, and often he'll look at, I'll tell him what my problem is, the problem that I can't seem to solve. And he'll look at it, and he'll get it instantly. And it's not just that he's more experienced than I am, which he certainly is, but it's also because he's not in the thick of it. It's not really his project, it's my project. I'm the one feeling the time constraints and the pressure, so to speak, to get something done. And, after he points out and goes, well, did you look over here and did you try that? And then I go, wow, how did I miss that? And I think it's because, emotion and attachment to the outcome and desire, all of those things can obscure the true detached observation that's important. And, it works both ways. He often calls me for help, and even though I'm not as skilled as he is, sometimes I'll see something that he doesn't see for the same reason. It's his project, so he's more wrapped in it, more attached, and has his own biases about it. Whereas I don't have that, so even though I'm not as skilled as him, sometimes I can come in and go, oh, John, look, it's over here. Did you see that? And it's just a good point that it's one thing, I think it's easier to see it when other people are, their view of what's going on is flawed in some way. It's easier to see that when it's happening to someone else. But when it's happening, the real challenge of the Tao is, what about when it happens to you? Are you able to step back from your own biases, your own attachments, your own desires? When you're in the thick of something, can you back up and see what's really there and take the best action? And that's really what the Tao teachings are all about. And of course, that starts, I think, very importantly with being calm, getting calm. So, now let's see here. So I'm going to start to sum it up here, if I can. Discarding our biases and prejudgments is not easy. Even when scientists employ something as wonderful and as successful as the scientific method, they cannot always escape the biases that human beings can often possess. The ancients were able to gain wisdom by observing nature and human interactions without prejudgment. By being mindful of the present moment and avoiding our biases, we can avail ourselves of that same wisdom and discover the patterns that were first discovered in the distant past. Observing with a detached state of mind gives one the clarity to see an expanded view of the event at hand. By contrast, strong attachments, desires, and emotions about a situation will obscure a clear understanding of what is unfolding, thus hampering our ability to take the correct actions. The challenge for us is to apply detached observation not just to the situations of others, but to our own personal situations, thus allowing us to avoid the negative results of poor decisions and actions that are often fueled by emotions, desires, and attachments. Okay, so I want to end with a book recommendation, The Tao of Joy Every Day, a great book to use daily to help one study and learn the Tao teachings and put them into action. Okay, so there it was, observations, day 10, detached and unbiased examination. I hope I was able to say something that was of use to you today, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday.
Thank you, Alex. Well, it's a good thing we did not lose the power or connection from beginning to end.
Oh, excellent.
So just a quick comment on what you've been presenting, which is excellent. There's an old saying in Chinese that goes like, 旁观者清，当局者迷. So 8 characters, and it's split in 2 parts. If there's interest from everyone to get into details, I'd be happy at a later date to provide the characters and break them down one by one. But for now, I'll just tell you, I'll just tell everyone a quick summary of what it means. The first part, 旁观者清, it means those who observe on the sidelines are 清, are clear. So people who observe from the sidelines are clear. And the second part, 当局者迷, that means the one who's in the thick of it, the one who's facing the situation, that person is confused. That person is me, lost and confused. So that often describes a lot of the situations that we see all around us. When people are dealing with something, they don't see all the details that will help them. When you're looking at it, from the sidelines, you're wondering, hey, how come they don't do X, Y, Z? It's so obvious, it's so clear. How come they can't see it? Well, they can't because they are occupied, right in the middle of that something.